and this is without a doubt, right? The lives of these former colonies, the life within these former colonies is far better than their home countries. And that's just a simple fact. Okay. And Ishan says, yes, I happen to agree with this. Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia owes Europe reparations for the Barbary slave trade. Yes. Why are we only talking about one side of this, right? And utterly forgetting the benefits that were brought by the British, by Britain spreading its civilization. And I mean, you guys have had jobs. I'm assuming you guys are upstanding citizens. You go to work, you come with a new idea, you figure out a new process for doing something at work, right? You say, hey, you know what? We can save time, money, and effort. We can make our lives easier by using this process to deal with this problem. And you know what you find? Someone at the office is a complete doofus. And that person gives you grief, or because we've always done things this way, they refuse to change. They see you as a threat. They see you as being someone who's going to usurp their position, someone who's going to make them look foolish. They don't see the value of your ideas. You've seen the opposition. Well, if I come into a country and I say, hey, we've got reading and electricity and medicine, do you primitive people want to try some of this stuff? They'll go, oh no, you're foreigners invading our land, we need to kill you. It's not like people go, yeah, that's a great idea. No, there's conflict. There's always resistance, even for the best of ideas. So it's not always that the Brits came in there and just started killing people left and right. No, maybe they landed on a primitive island and those people try to kill them right away. This has happened in countless places, right? With the best of intentions. You will come across primitive tribes who are violent, who are ignorant, and who are simply going to respond badly. So there's more than one side to that story. Moving on, let's see if I missed any good comments. Here where I live, baptism records show that former slaves centuries ago used to marry the relatives of their slave owners who was going to pay the reparations. Wow, Tony, that is fascinating. So the baptism records show that former slaves used to marry the relatives of their slave owners. That's very interesting. That does lead to a legal quandary, and we're going to be discussing that. Thank you. Yeah. So what do we have from you? Every part of the world, people have been on top and on the bottom. Forget the past and don't expect the innocent to owe you anything. Make your own life. And I agree. Now, what do we have? As much as I wonder where the ambulance chases are with regard to the COVID, where's the UN with regard to this? Yes, the UN, well, the UN is owned by China and the Islamic bloc. So, yeah. So, let's see. Deborah Irene, you're welcome. Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you. She says, this is an incredibly important discussion. Yes, thank you. Ishan says, the British created the countries of India and Pakistan by uniting the hundreds of independent princely states and also very much warring states. Let's continue. So now, on the question of reparations, we have to face two questions at least. Is a current descendant of a slave ethically entitled to benefit from their ancestors' suffering? So I can legitimately go to the archives in South Africa and prove that one of my ancestors came from Indonesia, of all places, right? Indonesia, as a slave in the 1690s, and indentured servitude, or whatever the case you want to call it, right? So that I come from ancestors who came. So my family descends from the 1690s from an ancestor who descended from potential slavery, right? Am I entitled to reparations? I mean, that's a lot of money. Where's this money going to come from, right? And who should pay? Now, here's the question. Who should pay? So this leads to another question. Is it ethical for an innocent person today to be culpable for the sins of their forefathers, right? So let me see. So Philip Thomas in the UK is white, and therefore he owes money for slavery 220 years ago. And he's got to pay it to some black guy who doesn't want to get a job. Is that fair? I'd say the answer is no. I'd say that is simply grift. That is simply someone just making hay out of guilt, right? So, yeah. Now, this CARICOM, this is the Caribbean body, these guys up here, are calling for reparations. And they want the British taxpayers to pay. So the question is, why? Why should you pay? What do you owe them? So, again, out of a population of millions, there were only 3,000 slave owners in Britain. 3,000. So what percentage is 3,000 of 80 million people? What is that percentage? Like, that's near zero. And they suddenly want all Britons, all Americans, anyone who's white, to pay this, right? To pay someone money, to just throw money away because why? Right? So this is not going to fly. And of course, as we know, as any YouTube comments historian, and there are many very intelligent YouTube comment historians, will gleefully tell you of those 3,000 slave owners in Britain, 2,998 of them were Jews. I expect those comments to pop up very shortly. Someone will be happy to give me the numbers. In fact, of the 3,000 slave owners, 3,001 of them were Jews, of course. That's right. So what do we have here? Berber people claim where the word barbarian comes from, so they reject the word. Sorry, but the Romans called it. Okay, well, is that relevant to this? Okay, yeah, so moving on. Now, the vast majority of the population in Britain descend from people who lived in abject poverty and hardship, working in conditions akin to serfdom. So, do they all owe each other money? You know, so there's this. What you have is a very one-sided history that fails to recognize that you had people that were themselves living in poverty, people who themselves didn't have much, who had to go through society with very little. And over time, these societies, these countries, embraced good ideas, developed themselves, industrial revolution, and so on, embraced science, embraced good ideas, developed into wealthy nations. And they don't owe you money. They themselves come from great hardship and great poverty. You cannot simply point out some guy and say, you owe money to black people. No, maybe black people need to get a job, right? Try working for once in your life. Now, why should they, as taxpayers, pay reparations? These are legitimate questions. So you've got the issue of tort law, and then you've got these issues here. And there's more to that as well. So 16% of the British population is foreign born. They pay taxes in Britain. So why should they pay for reparations? So now you've got a guy from Ghana who's now legitimately British. He now has to pay some black guy on the street slavery reparations. So a portion of his taxes have now to go to pay somebody, right? Is he liable for this? Is some guy who moved there from India? There's a lot of Indians in Britain. There's a lot of Pakistanis. Are they liable for that? No, so no, this doesn't make sense. What about the descendants of slaves living in Britain today? Are they liable to pay for slavery? Why should people from Trinidad and Tobago living in the UK pay reparations to people in Jamaica? Are they liable?